Hello, hello. Good afternoon. It's really lovely to be back in Perth. This is actually my favourite city in the world. So thank you so much. It's lovely. And to the guys at Yao for inviting me. What a brilliant day this has been so far. Anita, honestly, she literally put shit on Mars. How am I supposed to compete with that? It's like, I can make a website responsive. It's not quite the same thing. As Chris mentioned, I've just recently relocated from the UK, where it's always cold and gloomy, to Sydney, where I'm now head of design at Ansarada. We're actually hiring designers. If anybody's interested, you can drop me an email. And before that, for 18, 19 years, I actually worked at my own company, Stuff and Nonsense. And our goal was always to make the most distinctive, creative work that we could for the web. And that meant work that went beyond just making a digital product or a website, something that's easy to use. You know, I want to use creative design to make things that people like to use and remember. And a good deal of my work over the past few years has been about designing systems and pattern libraries and style guides for clients, including Sun Life and WWF. And these tools have become incredibly fashionable. There's articles and talks and even entire conferences like Clarity that have been devoted to them. And perhaps the most well-known design system methodology today is Brad Frost's atomic web design. Brad's written a book about atomic web design, and he was kind enough to include me in the acknowledgements. He said to Andy Clark, who's been talking about design systems and atoms before it was the hip thing to do, thank you for all your writing and thinking, but you're still not getting my dog. My Instagram feed is full of Brad Frost's dog, he's called Ziggy, and other people's babies. I'm sure that's not normal. And in 2012, I actually introduced this idea of designing atoms and elements, which is a process of separating out the atmosphere of a design from a responsive layout. And we fast forward to today, and style guide is an umbrella term for several different types of design documentation. I'm going to stand over here. You know, they might be static PDF style or visual identity guides which somehow illustrate how a brand should be presented and how the assets should be used across different media. Or there's voice and tone guides which describe a brand's personality through the way that it speaks to its customers. We've got front-end code guidelines for developers, encouraging better collaboration across teams. And finally, we've got component or pattern libraries, which commonly contain examples of how to style those atoms and molecules and organisms and templates that Brad describes in atomic web design. So in my work, and I suspect in most of yours, when we talk about making a style guide for the web, we mean a combination of visual identity guides and component or pattern libraries. And these all offer something different, but more often than not, they've got something in common. Can you guess what that is? They all look ugly enough to have been designed by somebody that really enjoys configuring a router. Oh, that was mean. I mean, not everybody's going to think that an unimaginative style guide design is a problem. After all, as long as it contains the information that people need, it shouldn't matter what it looks like, right? But here's the thing. Beauty complements functionality. It doesn't detract from it. Creative design actually enhances somebody's engagement with a style guide, and it amplifies the content. And that means that to be effective, a style guide should present the content in appealing and engaging ways. So recent interest in design systems has also meant that reproductions of corporate design manuals have become really popular. This one's from British Rail. I ordered it, it didn't arrive on time. This is the NASA Graphic Standards Manual. It describes everything from a business card to the branding on a booster rocket. The New York City Transit Authority Graphic Standards Manual includes the most complete examples of how to use Helvetica I've ever seen. And then finally, the official symbol of the American Revolution Bicentennial Graphic Standards Manual explains not just how the symbol should be used, but also how it was created. And that's an important point. I'm going to come back to that later. And now there are collections of design guidelines online, including this one. It includes work from Microsoft and IBM and Apple. So the problem with uninspiring style guides is that not everybody needs to take the same information away from them. You know, if you're looking for markup and styles to code up a media object, you're probably going to be a technical type. But if you want to understand the balance of sizes across a typographic hierarchy, then you're more likely to be a creative. And what we need from a style guide is different, and yet so many style guides follow the same patterns. So I'm going to start by looking at color, which is one of the most important ingredients in a design, because it communicates personality, it creates mood, and it's vital for understanding and interaction vocabulary. So you'd think that style guides would present color in any number of imaginative ways. But you'll be disappointed. Because the most inspiring that you'll find look like a collection of chips from a Bunnings paint chart. Notice how I'm localizing in Australia now? In England, it was B&Q. I have no idea what I'm talking about. This is Lonely Planet's Rizzo, and it does a great job of separating the design elements from UI components, but you're going to struggle to get a feeling for Lonely Planet's design when you just look at those paint chips. Greenpeace's style guide uses the same approach, as did Sky's old web toolkit. And the Times' functional palette. Now, gov.uk, which is not a website known for its creative flair, varies this approach by using these little circles, which is nice. It's also really strange because circles don't feature anywhere in the branding or the design of the website. On the plus side, though, their designers have provided some context by categorizing colors based on usage, such as text and links and backgrounds and more. Google's material design, this offers an embarrassment of color. Most helpfully, though, it also advises people on how to combine primary and accent colors into usable palettes. Now, few style guides offer explanations, and even less by the way of inspiring examples. Most are extremely vague on how to use color. Here's one. Use color as a presentation element for either decorative purposes or to convey information. The Government of Canada's Web Experience Toolkit says rather obviously. Apparently, adding more colors to their palette has made Adobe rich and multi-dimensional. And I am really unsure what makes the draft US web design guidelines, standards colors, a distinctly American palette. But it's going to have to work bloody hard to achieve the goal of communicating warmth and trustworthiness after 100 days of Donald Trump. We're going to build great design systems. People won't believe it. They're going to be so great. So the University of Oxford is much more helpful. They explain how and why to use their colors. So the dark Oxford blue is used primarily in general page furniture, such as the backgrounds on headers and footers. And designers at Open Table, they've considered how to explain the hierarchy of their colors by presenting them and the various supporting colours in different sizes. So it's also really obvious which are their primary, supporting, and accent or neutral colours without them having to say so. Foursquare helpfully prescribe the percentages of colours that makes their marketing material distinctive. But there are many, many more ways in which we can describe colour more imaginatively. Steel is a power tool company. Its brand book, which is itself a really great example of thoughtful graphic design, that couldn't be clearer when it says, use this colour with this colour. And it presents this information clearly, but in a way that's consistent with the Steel brand. The designers of Alberta's corporate identity manual, they've cleverly combined their colours with images of the region that inspired them. And larger blocks of colour, they give people a stronger feeling for a design without making it difficult to find information about those colours. And finally, a style guide should demonstrate the interplay of colour and typography to ensure that people understand what's acceptable when it comes to colour contrast accessibility. So for some organisations, these brand books have developed into an art form. You know, if you find these things as inspiring as I do, it's important to remember that we shouldn't just copy their appearance. We've got to turn these inspirations into designs that work for our medium. So, for example, this page from the Barbican's brand book PDF suggests to me CSS blend modes and SVG. This distinctive Macmillan cancer support visual identity has been brought to every page of their brand guidelines. So Macmillan's colour chips match their style. But we get a much better understanding of their visual identity when those same colours are used in other imaginative ways. You know, of course, living style guides and pattern libraries often need to present information about colour values, and this is a fabulous opportunity for us to be creative. Perhaps we could design some interactive UI that helps everybody get the information that they need. You know, the Royal Mail is one of Britain's most recognisable brands. And this page from their brand book is really effective because it brings colour and typography and iconography together on a single page, and it gives an immediate impression. What could be more iconic than Royal Mail's livery? You know, colour chips can be used in effective ways to present colour information, but they don't have to be rectangular. We can fill playful shapes with colour and better connect them to the brand. So the designers at frozen yogurt maker Yogan Fruz, their brand manual, they did exactly that. They didn't just explain their colours. They tastefully display them inside silhouetted tubs of their frozen yogurt. And it conveys personality as well as their colour information. So style guides with personality make a bigger impression. This page is from Bing's product design guidelines, and it brings together their colour palette, graphic styles, logo, typography to demonstrate how they combine to create Bing's visual identity system. So, I believe that style guides should inspire people as well as inform them. And I kept this in mind when I started working on designing a series of what I've called inspired guides. And these are style guide templates that I hope are as beautiful as they are functional. And I made 6 sets of these. And they each contain pages for design principles and colors and logos and typography and form elements and buttons and interactive and navigation elements. And things like CSS custom properties, they've got massively great browser support right now, and they're fabulous for making quick color changes across style guides. They make that really quick and simple. And if you don't want Node.js or NPM or any other complicated technical solution to get in the way of making a style guide, just develop them with semantic HTML and CSS and SVG and maybe a little bit of native JavaScript. You know, you shouldn't need a framework or any particular software or toolset to make an inspiring style guide. So, you know, you can remove what dependencies you can. You know, and if you want to present color in different ways in your style guides, there's so much that we can do. You know, we needn't confine color information to a color palette page in the style guide. You know, we can find imaginative ways to display color across several different pages and show that in context with other parts of the design. So these are cover pages, splash pages that are, you know, packed with color, and they make an immediate impression. You know, visual hierarchy can be easier to understand than just labeling colors as primary and supporting and accent. So we should find creative ways to present that hierarchy. You know, you might use panels of different sizes, or you might arrange shapes on a modular grid and then fill that page with color. You know, don't limit yourself to rectangular color chips. You know, use circles or other shapes that are created just with CSS. And if irregular shapes are part of your brand, then fill SVG silhouettes with CSS and then wrap text around them using CSS shapes. You know, a project that I worked on for WWF last year, I redesigned their fundraising and adoption pages. And to deliver the systems within the budget allowed, I made a really simple little style guide and a design system. And I took colors from their palette and I assigned each one to a species that you could adopt, and then I added light and dark tints. And each shape in this interactive color wheel is a link to more information about how you use that color. The style guide includes other important information about color contrast and accessibility, alongside examples of how combinations of each of those colors can be used. And for the style guides that I design, I always try to go beyond simply documenting color palettes and type styles, because I want to describe visually what they mean for a brand. For example, on this project for Sun Life, I describe their colors and how to use them across a series of art-directed pages. And these reflect the lively personality of the Sun Life brand. We've got information about hex and RGB values, SAS variables, and when to use colors for branding or interaction or messaging. And it's all there, but in a format that appeals to creative and to technical people. And I also included information about color contrast accessibility, because understanding why certain combinations of colors are inaccessible can reduce testing times, and it can avoid a lot of arguments about color choices. And I always work to find distinctive ways to present color to better represent the brand. So for Sun Life, I made header graphics that show that their personality has a fun side. And I experimented with different ways in which we can communicate color hierarchy through various sizes and quantities of their circle device. So, alongside color, typography is probably going to be the defining aspect of any design. You know, we're very fortunate now that we can use any number of web fonts, and we're not just limited to using fonts that are installed on people's devices. So you might imagine that with so many beautiful typefaces available, style guide designers would constantly create inspiring ways to present them. But again, we'd be disappointed. Even Adobe, who own Typekit and numerous other typefaces, they've failed to make the most of these fabulous fonts. You know, most pattern libraries explain documentation, but they don't inspire. Information about type sizes is important, but so is the context in which the type gets used. And the treatment of type at different screen widths and the way that type elements interact with each other. Many style guides fail in demonstrating this, and even the best examples, including this gel from Westpac, it shows only a typeface's basic set of characters and not the context, including other elements and white space. As it's a publication with mostly written content, it would be more inspiring to see examples of actual headings, instead of this Greeking text that we see in the Times Style Guide. People use the quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog because it contains every letter in the English alphabet. But we can use our imaginations to better demonstrate the characteristics of a typeface quicker than any fox and more carefully considered than any lazy dog. Over the past few years, I've been rediscovering the work of accomplished art directors and graphic designers. As somebody that studied fine art and not graphic design, a lot of this decades-old work is still really new to me. In particular, I've been really inspired by Neville Brody's distinctive layout and typography design for the Face magazine in the early 1980s. Does anybody else remember the Face? Oh, one guy. Old as the hills. Learning about this work has convinced me that there is so much more that we can do to communicate our use of type within a style guide. And looking at inspiration from other medium, including print, we can learn ways to combine color and typography to better communicate the spirit of a brand, as well as how to use those assets. The New York City Transit Authority Graphic Standards Manual, this immerses a reader in the details of Helvetica. It showcases not just the letters, but the all-important and often really fascinating characters and numerals that often get forgotten in a style guide. By viewing these characters up close, we get a much better feel for their personality. And when illustrating type, we've also should explain how the characteristics of size and thickness and weight inform the design of other elements, including symbols and icons. Understanding how typography should be designed so that it's legible and readable when presented light on dark is something that's missing from pretty much all of the style guides that I've read. As is how typefaces work in combination with other icons and symbols. This page here from the New York City Transit Authority Graphic Standards Manual, this does a really fabulous job of demonstrating how Helvetica numerals and letters combine to create a design that would look at home on the New York Metro. Style guides should inspire designers by demonstrating potential applications for typography and other elements. The NASA Graphic Standards Manual does just that. It starts with NASA's iconic logo. And I really enjoy how their designers have explained the background to the typefaces that they've chosen. I know from experience how including explanations like this can help people to realize that the fonts that we use are the result of a long creative process. And we should support that by buying them. And they're not just commodities that come installed on our devices. NASA demonstrates how to use typography on its signage, as well as on vehicle livery. And it's so important to demonstrate how to use typography on even the most mundane items. These are paper forms from NASA, but they could easily have been email newsletters or signatures, which can all benefit from better typographic design. In a style guide, typography pages can include examples of cases and styles and weights of primary and supporting typefaces. We can include information about white space, and we can demonstrate how type treatment should vary when we use them light on dark. As a design often includes a supporting as well as a primary typeface, we need to devise interactive ways to be able to show the relationships between them. Many typefaces contain distinctive letters or numerals or symbols, so we should create space to showcase them. And rather than overlook numerals, we should design pages that show when and why somebody should choose to use a numeral from a supporting rather than a primary typeface. These pages of numerals, they can be fun. So we should find ways to display them that are as attractive as they are useful. And to give people a better understanding of how to use them, as well as breaking type down into component parts, like headings or paragraphs or quotes or lists, it's really important to show them in combination with other elements. So for example, the size of a caption relative to the image that describes it. So providing additional context by demonstrating a type element alongside a typographic scale and providing information about color at the same time gives us extra context. And we can use the process of designing a style guide to expand our repertoire of designs for elements that often get forgotten, like block and pull quotes. We can take the opportunity of bringing designers and developers together around a style guide to talk about creative possibilities without sacrificing performance or responsiveness or accessibility. So when I was designing for WWF, I didn't have any guidelines to follow. So I had to think really carefully about how I would typeset their already chosen typefaces. So I experimented by making some really simple HTML type sheets, and then I tested them on several different devices to understand the minimum and the maximum sizes that I could use. And then the style guide that I designed for WWF includes the organisms and includes even full page templates to give the fullest impression of a typographic design. And I took a similar approach for Sun Life. Here I was demonstrating the personality of the VAG rounded typeface through this interactive UI that includes information about the modular scale and information about color. Their style guide includes larger organisms and banners and common navigation to ensure that all parts combine to create a coherent whole. And to be effective, a style guide's typography shouldn't be reduced to the component parts. Instead, it should be seen as an ensemble of type elements, and each plays its part in the design. So, graphic images and icons. They are also a really important element in a design, especially in digital products and websites. So let's just turn the spotlight on how style guides routinely display this iconography. This is the Code for America style guide, and it presents icons at different sizes, but the designers at Clear Left haven't explained how the design of these icons should adapt when they're reproduced at different sizes. They're just taking the same icon and shrunken it down. They've also missed a really big opportunity to actually demonstrate the adaptability and the responsiveness by not presenting alternative icon versions inside, let's say, a picture element. I wish that the designers at Mapbox had thought harder about designing an interactive interface that makes the most of these really pretty icons. And sadly, Atlassian's style guide says absolutely nothing about how to create new icons that match their existing set. Meanwhile, gov.uk I finally found those circles. It's easy to poke fun, especially at gov.uk. But it's really hard to get the design of a style guide right because designers and developers need something different from them. Developers might need file names and CSS class attribute values, while designers might need to learn how to create new icons with the same visual style as the existing ones. And satisfying both needs can be really tricky, but the challenge isn't any more difficult than those that we face every day when we're designing products and websites. I'm absolutely convinced that we can do better. You might feel a whiff of nostalgia when you're looking through British Rail's corporate identity manual. This iconic visual identity extends to locomotives and the uniforms of people who used to run them. The best style guides explain the why as well as the how. And this is especially true when it comes to the design of logo marks and symbols. And as somebody who didn't study graphic design, I'm absolutely fascinated by explanations about how these symbols were created. Understanding the thinking that went into designing a symbol can help people appreciate how and when to use variations of it. And this matters now more than ever because a symbol can be reproduced at any number of different sizes across a vast array of devices. And responsive style guides can themselves demonstrate the appropriate size or version of a symbol so that it remains clearly identifiable. This is especially important when light-colored symbols are used on dark backgrounds. Color and icons and type should complement each other within a design, and style guides should demonstrate how to combine these elements to achieve the most effective result. I absolutely love the precision involved in designing this signage. And is it only me that thinks that this could be the best web design button of all time? I love this. So knowing how an icon's being designed goes hand in hand with understanding how to use it. Fully appreciating principles and proportions makes working an icon into a design at the right size and with the appropriate amount of white space around it much, much easier. Of course, not every symbol needs precision. I'm always amused when I read that to maketh the Skype cloud, we can use circles, any size and placement and shape, but make sure it looks cloudish. Love that. In stark contrast, the official symbol of the American Revolution Bicentennial Graphic Standards Manual goes into great detail when it describes how their symbol was created. And the manual painstakingly describes how maintaining the proportions between the symbols and the surrounding text. Reproductions of graphic manuals like the symbol of the American Revolutionary Bicentennial are perfect places to look for inspiration to improve the beauty and effectiveness of our own style guides and pattern libraries. For the style guide that I designed for Sun Life, I tried to go beyond just documenting their icons, and I used the icons themselves to add personality to the style guide. As with almost all of their pages, the icons page was pretty thoughtfully art-directed to explain the anatomy of an icon and how to design one with the correct proportions, and then when and where to use it. So, for example, I adjusted their Sun Life logo so that each circle is 75% larger than the one that went before it in the style guide, in the Sunrise. And the style guide then explains how I use those proportions to create a grid, which has now become the foundation for all future icon designs. And I use the same principles to create graphic illustrations so that every graphical element has a relationship to the proportions of the Sun Life logo. Explaining these processes clearly to future designers is going to help them maintain standards and maintain consistency, especially as their collection of icons grows. And because showing is always, always better than telling, I use those same graphic illustrations to bring the Sun Life style guide to life. I took the same approach with their bubbles, which have become a natural fit for text and messaging online. And in all the work that I do, I try to use creative design to improve not only how something looks, but also how effective it is. Style guides should be so much more than just a guide to a library of patterns. They should inspire people to make better designs. They can teach people the value of good design and why it's so important to keep standards high. A style guide is also the perfect place to experiment. If you've been aching to try out a new design or layout technique like CSS Grid or Flexbox, free from the normal constraints of browser support. I want to stretch expectations about what style guides are developed with HTML and CSS can look like by making them full of subtle blend modes and calc and feature queries and Flexbox. And I hope that that's going to inspire people to learn about those new technologies too. A style guide is the perfect place to write about the history of your design. These stories are so often lost due to the fast pace of today's design and development environments. So instead of only showing finished work in a case study on your company's portfolio, write about your thought processes and show your design's evolution. The information is as important in terms of documenting the history of web design too. When I designed this style guide for WWF, I added several pages that explained how and why I designed this unusual asymmetrical grid. And I showed the steps that I'd taken and the tools that I'd used. And parts of my design for WWF were based on a modular grid system, and that's rarely used on the web. So the style guide was the perfect place for me to write about that system and how to educate the designers who'd be using it on future projects. The best systems are based on a solid set of design principles. So it's important that a style guide explains them really, really well. And this is something that Shopify's Polaris does extremely well. This was launched last week. And hats off to Shopify. This is the best style guide I've seen all year. It gets so many things right. For me, good design starts with accessibility, and Polaris makes usability for everyone and building inclusive experiences part of these principles. And because showing is always better than telling, Polaris makes it clear what to do and what not to do. And it includes not just a clear set of guidelines for when and how to use each color in the palette, but graphic examples. And because a great style guide isn't ever finished, Polaris makes it really easy for people to collaborate on the development. And it brings together this wealth of material that's relevant for people in designer and developer and other roles. Why not bring your design principles off the screen and out into the three-dimensional world? An intern at Salesforce designed these beautiful design system posters, design principle posters. And they've got famous San Francisco landmarks like the Golden Gate Bridge. And these now remind Salesforce of their design principles every day. In fact, you could choose to break the model altogether and combine all the elements in your visual identity and patterns into a single sheet poster for designers and developers and maybe third-party suppliers to hang on their walls. The possibilities really, really are endless. So I hope that I've inspired you to think a little bit more creatively about the design of your own style guides or component or pattern libraries and why creative design can inspire and inform people better. Thanks very much for listening and for an incredible day. Thank you.